This is America, and right now, America has troops on standby in a region it says it does not want to fight in. Warships, Marines, airborne forces are arriving even as Washington insists this will not become a prolonged conflict. So are these troops leveraged to force a deal or the opening move in a wider war? Now, I'll be back a little later in the program as we explore that question. But to start us off, here's Anna Burns-Francis.
Thanks, Manny. The president has promised the war will be over soon. But what will happen before then? In a moment, we'll be joined by our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, and Richard Gaisford is near a military school in upstate New York. It's the men and women of the American military who are now waiting to find out what their future holds. And at the moment, this war is not going in a direction any of them, let alone the administration, would want. This footage coming out of Iran purported to show US forces scrambling a search and rescue mission after one of its fighter jets was shot down by the regime over the southwest of the country. Iranian media is already reporting it's found parts of the aircraft. And only hours beforehand, the Secretary of Defense asked a top army boss to stand down.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has asked Army Chief of Staff General Randy George to step down.
In a major shakeup within the Pentagon.
But the reality is there have been rumors that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth was going to fire him for some time.
And the president's updated schedule shows he's staying in D.C. this long weekend. The rapidly shifting situation is creating a lot of uncertainty. But the whole way along, Donald Trump has seemed reluctant to put boots on the ground.
I don't even want to talk about it now. I mean, I don't think it's an appropriate question. You know, I'm not going to answer it. Could there be? Possibly, for very good reason. Have to be very good reason. And I would say if we ever did that, they would be so decimated that they wouldn't be able to fight at the ground level.
And it would seem he's in step with public opinion. A recent poll found 62% of Americans oppose sending in ground troops. Nearly 60% of people think it's unlikely the US will reach a settlement to end the war in Iran. And 46% say they don't think Trump will back out of the war before the US accomplishes its objectives. We'll find out more about what American military families think of the potential for a ground invasion with our correspondent, Richard Gaisford, who joins us from near the West Point Military Academy in upstate New York. But first, let's go to the White House and to Kimberly Halkett. Kimberly, the president is staying in Washington, D.C. He's not headed to Florida this long weekend. Are we expected to hear from him?
Well, there's nothing on the official schedule, but what I can tell you is that having the U.S. president stay on a holiday Easter weekend is certainly unusual. In fact, some would even call this a crisis posture, given the fact that there is that unfolding event, the downed F-15 that is currently in Iran, and the fact that there is a search and rescue operation underway, which the U.S. military has now made a top priority. What this suggests is that there's a need for real-time decision-making on the part of the U.S. president / commander-in-chief of the military, because there is a real possibility of escalation. The low-flying aircraft involved in this search and rescue mission are particularly vulnerable, and as a result, we know the U.S. president may be required to make a decision on further strikes. So this is the type of situation that requires the U.S. president be at the White House, perhaps in the Situation Room, with his top security advisors. In the interim, what we are watching carefully is for further updates. The U.S. president, typically quite vocal on social media, has been rather quiet in recent hours. And again, the fact that he is staying here on an Easter weekend is highly unusual.
Kimberly Halkett at the White House, thank you. Let's go to Richard Gaisford now. Richard, you are near West Point Military Academy, considered a very prestigious, America's first military academy. What are families living in the area telling you?
Yeah, this place has been training military leaders, Anna, since 1802 by the banks of the River Hudson. Fair to say it is a tough 4-year course here. And any of those military leaders currently in the Middle East, potentially getting ready for a ground invasion, will have been through that course. And the town that surrounds it, well, it's a very good place to come and gauge public opinion because almost everybody there either knows someone that works inside, has a link to the military, has family connections in some way, and really desperately watching the news at the moment, wanting to know whether those troops will eventually go in or not. And as you'll hear, actually, there's very few, if any, people that we've spoken to who would go on camera that believe that would be a good idea.
I just think it's a really big waste of time, honestly, and it's just causing more drama when we don't need it, honestly. We have so many problems here.
So putting boots on the ground would worry you?
Yes, definitely. It'd be an incredible loss of valuable life for no good reason, for a war that didn't have to happen in the first place.
Of course, because I have family that are in the Army, so we worry. We want them all to come home safely. You know, war is bad, and it shouldn't happen.
I do have a brother in the Marines, though, so...
So you must worry?
Yeah.
And if he were to tell you that he was on his way into Iran, what would you think?
It would be unfortunate. It would suck. But hopefully they could, come to an agreement before then, but hopefully no boots on the ground.
Richard, somewhat surprising given the military history of the town and the people who live there. What was your main takeaway from those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, we have spoken to people who work directly there, who wouldn't go on camera, who were perhaps more in favour of military action. But almost everyone we've spoken to, Anna, is really concerned about boots on the ground because, for many of them, they're not entirely clear about what the objectives of this mission would be. And I think that is the issue. And of course, at the moment, the death toll in terms of those killed in action for US military forces stands at 13. It is thought that that number would go much higher should the US decide that a ground invasion is necessary. And that is part of the political decision that the president is going to have to take, knowing, having heard those kind of voices that you've just heard there from around the West Point Training Academy, that people are worried about it and may take a dim view if this isn't a mission that has been really well thought through.
Richard Gaisford joining us from near the West Point Military Academy in upstate New York. Thank you. The US and Israeli war against Iran is now in its second month with no clear end in sight. President Trump's repeatedly said America's involvement will go on for a few more weeks. But with thousands more US soldiers being deployed by sea and by air, it's heightening speculation about a looming ground war. Lucia Newman reports from Washington, D.C.
The USS Tripoli, an amphibious assault ship, is now in the Middle East, joined by the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, bringing U.S. fighting forces in the Iranian operations theater to above 50,000. But what for? Donald Trump had said no to a ground war, and then he said he couldn't rule out boots on the ground. But then no one can accuse the U.S. president of never changing his mind.
But we're not ready to leave yet. We'll be leaving in pretty much the very near future.
With the Iran conflict now in its fifth week, the commander of U.S. Central Command visited U.S. troops in the Middle East, further raising speculation about a military escalation.
Okay, how many missions have you flown?
This is one of many memorials in Washington, D.C., honoring U.S. soldiers who died in combat, in this case in the Korean War. It was not officially declared a war, even though it cost almost 37,000 American lives. It was followed by other conflicts like Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And in all those cases, the results did not go as planned for the United States.
Trump is reportedly under pressure from Republican hawks and allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia to launch ground operations. Iran's Speaker of Parliament says they're, quote, waiting for American soldiers to enter on the ground so they can rain fire upon them. The U.S. threat of a land assault may be designed to pressure Iran to seek a settlement. But should there be a ground operation, the risks of a prolonged conflict are enormous. Iran is not Venezuela. Its well-trained armed forces number 420,000, not to mention its 185,000-strong Revolutionary Guard and a 600,000 paramilitary force. Anything short of a quick and decisive victory would send petrol prices soaring further, angering American voters ahead of the all-important midterm elections. A high military, political, and economic price tag that President Trump may or may not be willing to pay. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Washington.
From troop deployments to questions about strategy and intent, American news outlets are split on whether the US is positioning for escalation or signalling restraint. Let's go back to Manny Rapalo in the newsroom with more on how the story's being reported.
This is the picture we're getting from the U.S. newssphere, and it's all about how far the United States is willing to go in its conflict with Iran. There's been a lot of debate, a lot of speculation in this regard, particularly over the deployment of U.S. troops.
The U.S. and Iran continue to threaten each other as thousands of U.S. forces arrive in the Middle East.
The Trump administration is sending more military forces to the Middle East, while at the same time claiming Iran has asked for a ceasefire, a claim Iranian officials say is not true.
If these troops are sent in, if there are now boots on the ground, is that going to extend this timeline?
Okay, here's where the debate begins to split. Some say U.S. troops are a tactical preparation for a ground invasion of Iran. Others argue that they're being used as a coercive diplomatic tool to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. This is the New York Post. Trump tells Post war against Iran won't last much longer. Strait of Hormuz will reopen automatically after U.S. exit. This reporting goes on to say Trump's remarks on potential U.S. military actions can't necessarily be taken at face value, and he has used public deception before to give Tehran a false sense of security. Now, this is a theme that we're seeing here. This is Aaron Cohen speaking on Fox Business. Take a listen.
Everybody's saying boots on the ground, boots. So this is all signaling. This is deterrence. And this is what I call optionality. So the troop buildup that we're seeing right now, I want to be very clear. This is not an invasion. It's about giving President Trump options. And people don't have exposure to these classified options here. When you move a rapid deployment force and position assets like the Tripoli, the 82nd Airborne Special Operations assets, it's building what's called a flexible strike posture.
Now, it's worth noting that there is a whole other way of thinking here. Let's head over to USA Today with this headline: Americans don't want U.S. troops in Iran. It asks the question, will Trump care? It goes on to say avoiding a lengthy war with Iran seems to be the only thing many Americans agree on right now. Now, despite the different perspectives, the same question is being asked across the news. Are U.S. forces being deployed to end the war, or could they be marching into a deeper one?
Well, that's the question many more will be asking today. Joining us to discuss is Alex Fatanga, Senior Fellow and Iran Program Director at the Middle East Institute, and Joel Rayburn, a former senior US diplomat. Thank you both for coming in. Alex, I'll start with you. Does the downing of a jet lay the brick, or the final brick in the path, for moving on to a ground incursion?
Really difficult for me to say at this point. I would say I don't think this is a turning point in terms of the military campaign. But the big question for me is whether it's going to result in a new sort of political realities here in the United States in the sense of creating more sort of opposition basically to this war, particularly in the Republican Party. Because if that doesn't happen, the downing of a war is unfortunate, downing of aircraft, as unfortunate as it is, obviously is to be expected in a war that's now lasted 5 weeks.
Yeah. Joel, do you agree? Do you disagree? Is this a turning point in the conflict?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it won't have any impact on the military campaign. That's the kind of thing that the military has to plan for. It's quite remarkable, actually. There's been well over 10,000 sorties, far more than that if you combine the U.S. and Israeli air forces, with as little loss or danger to the aircraft that have happened so far. So I think it's not something that's unfortunately unexpected. Militarily, it won't make any difference at all.
Militarily, it won't make a difference, but obviously, militarily is only one perspective, and there, as president, will be other considerations that Donald Trump will have to measure when deciding whether this is a point at which to put boots on the ground. Is that a fair assessment? And what I mean is public opinion. There is still a missing crew member.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's obviously very important, and that might shape the president's calculations. But fundamentally, I think, despite the buildup, the president is still hoping for that diplomatic, off-ramp to present itself. And obviously, here he needs the help of the Iranians. And I'm not getting a sense that he's willing to meet them halfway. And I think that's obviously the magical moment. If you can meet them halfway, if the U.S. softens its position on the 15 points that the U.S. put out there, the Iranians have to soften their 5 points. There is actually a middle ground there in terms of the core interest, which, just reminding everybody, the core interest is no Iranian nuclear bomb. If that's the core issue, I can see some kind of diplomatic track being able to perhaps work in that direction.
It's a fair point. But, Joel, I want to bring up something Alex just mentioned then, and he said the president will still be looking for that off-ramp. Does this present a problem then? Because Iran, it would be not unreasonable to assume, will see this as somewhat of a victory, being able to down a jet and, as at the moment, only one crew member found.
First, can I say, I don't think that the downing of an aircraft on the interior of Iran will have any bearing on the president's decision to use or not use ground troops. That'll be focused on whether they're required, I think, to secure the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz. I don't think the president's looking for an off-ramp. I think if there's if there's a capitulation from Tehran where he can meet his 15 points without having to continue the war, then he would probably take that. But barring that, I think he's comfortable. I think the military commanders are comfortable that they're going to be able to get to that point using just military means.
Okay. Iran's leadership has been just as vocal as America's in trading fiery words, with a military spokesman warning any escalation is a waste of time.
اطلاعات شما از توان و قدرت نظامی و تجهیزات ما ناقص است.
The sites you believe you have targeted are insignificant, and our strategic military production takes place in locations you are completely unaware of, and you will never be able to reach them. We will save you the trouble. Do not count our missiles, drones and strategic equipment, because you will certainly be mistaken and get nowhere.
Joel, I'll come to you. Is sort of rhetoric like that forcing America into a position?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it has any bearing on U.S. decision-making at all. Listen, there's an entire military reality that's playing out. The U.S. military has been, and the Israeli military too, uncharacteristically, has been quite tight on the operational security. So there's a lot of operational details, battle damage assessments that are not getting into the public. It's a very one-sided military contest right now, and President Trump and other decision-makers have that full assessment. So that's what's driving their decision making.
The issue is in asymmetrical warfare, it doesn't look one-sided though, does it? And public perception does play a huge role in ultimately shifting perception on how a president who has to compete politically and domestically for his future.
In the information sphere, you're absolutely right. It's the one front where the Iranians are essentially matching us. On the military side, they aren't.
Alex, I'll ask you, I mean, you seem to be nodding your head a few times there.
Well, look, the Iranian side has pretty much from day one said they're not expecting to win this war militarily. Yeah. Win for them strategically is make this war so costly for the United States and Israel that they don't come back in 6 months' time and try this again. That's how they measure success.
So then when you say not winning it militarily, we do see the movement of troops. There are now 50,000, and it pales in comparison to Iranian troops if you are talking about a ground incursion. What then is the message being sent by the US by sending 50,000 troops into the region?
Look, the Iranian side should take him seriously, President Trump, because if you think this is just posturing, then I think you might be misreading the American president. He might actually escalate. I think this week's speech by the president suggested strongly that that is something he is willing to consider. And he, mentioned wars that had lasted years. He mentioned Vietnam War and so on. So maybe he's preparing the American public opinion for a protracted conflict. But militarily, I still have doubts and questions whether he has made up his mind on the ultimate prize, regime change through the use of American force, which to me ultimately means occupying Iran, which is something that would be requiring hundreds of thousands of troops and a long conflict. Again, I just don't know if the president is willing to go there.
Yeah. Joel, what do the troops in the region then do from your perspective? Is it a matter of leverage or is it a clear intent?
Well, I think there's absolutely zero chance that President Trump is going to order a massive 2003-style invasion of Iran. The kind of forces that are in motion to the Middle East or are already there in the Middle East, the ground forces, these are Marines, these are the 82nd Airborne, these are highly specialized units. They're trained and equipped to do things like seize islands and seize vessels and to take port infrastructure. This is not the kind of force that you would assemble to do a massive sweep into Iran, and that's just not in the cards. And it's not necessary to achieve President Trump's strategic goals.
Okay. Does even sending troops into the region, Alex, give the indication that you are preparing to extend the conflict?
Sure. I want to go back to what Joel said. I agree. But, going back to the strategic end mission, I still don't know what success would look like for President Trump. He might have one in his mind. He hasn't certainly articulated it. And I can tell you, when I look at it, in terms of where we were before this war, the nuclear issue was a problem. It's still pretty much a problem. The enriched uranium is still out there. The ballistic missiles still being fired. The proxies are still pretty much alive. And we have added one other problem, the Strait of Hormuz. And if you send troops to clear the way for controlling the Strait of Hormuz, I don't know if 50,000 troops going to do it, because all Iran needs to do is to be able to fire off a drone or missile from somewhere in that vast territory that's called Iran. And that might just stop the flow of traffic for indefinite. And again, so how do you, if you're a United States president, how can you come out of that and say that was a win just because I am posturing militarily?
Those concerns being echoed by the likes of Democratic senators like Richard Blumenthal, who says the future direction of the war is not clear enough to justify a potential escalation that could result in the loss of more American lives.
My questions have been unanswered, and I will demand answers because the American people deserve to know. And I guess I am most concerned about the threat to American lives of potentially deploying our sons and daughters on the ground in Iran.
Joel, what kind of extension to this conflict is palatable?
Well, I think it depends. Let me answer it a different way. Yeah. I mean, you have to weigh, as a national security strategist, you have to weigh the costs of action. You have to weigh those against the costs of inaction. So the fact that the Iranian regime was still wreaking havoc in the region, they were engaged in an active war in several countries, they were building a ballistic missile arsenal. I mean, this was something that couldn't be ignored, and other means weren't really sufficing. So I think what we couldn't, the cost of letting that continue to fester to a point where the Iranian regime was just sort of impregnable because of its ballistic missile deterrent and drone deterrent, I think it's something that it meant that time was not a luxury.
Sure, but that's not the choice being made now, is it? Because the conflict has now begun. The choice is between two different things. It is to continue or find an off-ramp.
I think I'm just my personal judgment, without any inside information. I don't think President Trump intends to leave the Strait of Hormuz under the effective control of the Iranian regime by the end of this conflict. Okay. I think he intends to take it probably by force. The kind of forces he's moving into the region would enable him to potentially do that. So I don't think there's any chance he leaves what is essentially a militarily defeated regime still getting a strategic win by being able to assert control over that strait.
That is a different perspective that we haven't talked much about. Alex, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, look, I just want to go back. I think if you occupy 1/3 of southern Iran still be able to position to warn off those ships and tankers and keep the traffic away. If that's the core objective here, the way to do it is either to get rid of the Islamic Republic in its entirety, or seek some kind of diplomatic resolution where Iran says no more are they going to be, creating trouble around the strait.
The Secretary of Defence has said all options are still on the table, but not forever.
President Trump will make a deal he is willing, and the terms of the deal are known to them. If Iran is not willing, then the United States War Department will continue with even more intensity.
Alex, Pete Hegseth used the word intensity. Now, he's not delivering a message to Iran. That message is to the American domestic audience. What does intensity mean when he is telling them that?
That's a great question. I don't actually have a good answer. I'm looking at all the targets that haven't been hit. Over 13,000 by the most recent report I saw. 13,000 targets in about 5 weeks. That's a lot. What's left to hit at this point? And the president is warning, that Iranian civilian infrastructure might be hit. I don't know if that's just, again, posturing, bluster on his part, if he's going to go down there. Because one thing that would really upset a lot of folks, particularly the Iranian people, by and large, who are against this regime, is if they are being targeted as a people, and the war goes from being one between the United States, Israel, and the Islamic Republic, and one being fought against the people of Iran. Because then, in that scenario, who wins? The Islamic Republic. The narrative that they have always sort of put out there wins. And that's a terrible situation to contemplate.
Joel, I'll come to you finally. Who in this administration, if anyone, is keen on a ground invasion?
No. The president's the decision maker on this, and it's not going to.
But he has advisors.
Sorry,
he must have advisors.
It boils down to: do you have the objective of using military means to force open the Strait of Hormuz, to secure the Persian Gulf for a resumption of safe commercial shipping, or not? If the president decides that, and the president, I think, is fully equipped by this point in his presidency and his experience to be able to make that decision.
Thank you very much. Joel Rayburn, former senior US diplomat, and Joel Vatanka, senior fellow and Iran program director at the Middle East Institute. Thank you both for coming in today.
Pleasure.
The speculation over whether there will be US boots on the ground in Iran is being dissected by the American public. Voices across the political spectrum are getting increasingly heated and polarised about the possibility. Alex Baird has this roundup of the conversation.
Boots on the ground. The debate online coming back to this. Soldiers already coming back home in caskets. And Iran's military pledging that if American troops set foot on Iranian soil, not a single one should make it out alive. The speculation on social media reaching fever pitch about whether those boots are close to touching soil. Army vet and Democratic Congressman Pat Ryan saying it's clear what's happening and that Trump owes an explanation now. Other commentators combing over recent shots of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth with the troops, saying this is not a good sign. If we were about to pull out, I don't think this would be happening right now. Far-right podcaster Nick Fuentes calling out the elephant in the room.
Something is taking time, but it isn't diplomacy.
And the latest, that 3 Army generals have been fired. You can see why people are talking. Joe Kent, who quit as boss of the National Counterterrorism Centre last month, desperate to keep those boots home.
This would be a catastrophic escalation that will only result in more bloodshed and further escalate this disastrous war.
Prominent Trump supporter Mark Levin batting for the president, saying, well, he never made any promises not to deploy, and why shouldn't we?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, and we wouldn't need 300,000 of them.
The response to that from former MAGA voice Candace Owens.
I say by all means allow the Mark Levins, the Ben Shapiros to sign their offspring up instead.
The speculation mill is going full bore. Trump's speech on Wednesday night now seen by some as a sales pitch, paving the way for a new escalation. Professor Adam Cochran with this somber takeaway. It is clear what is coming.
That's all from the team here in Washington, D.C. On This Is America, we'll keep following the decisions that shape the US and influence the world. Today, we've been discussing the American troop buildup in the Middle East and whether that's being used as a bargaining chip or a sign of military escalation. You can catch up on this discussion again by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For now, we'll head back to our headquarters in Doha. Thanks for joining us.